Question. So right now we would like to start with a few questions. So Dr. Standish, someone would like to ask, does religion interfere with an honest study of science? Perhaps he is asking, are we trying to bring a bias in a study of science we are a person of faith? Are we bringing a bias into our study?
First of all, everybody has a religion, okay? And so somebody who's an atheist is just as religious as you. They have just as much a theology as you do. And so um, escaping religion, there is no such thing as no religion. Religion is necessary, or what I would call metaphysics, is necessary for doing science in the first place. Um, uh, consider, for example, well, let's go with a Darwinian view. Um, Imagine that you believe that eyes have evolved. Well, why have they evolved? There's only one reason, and that is that they make you more fit, which ultimately means you have more babies that go into the next generation. So that's the only reason that you have eyes. Based on that, why would you believe that your eyes are necessarily giving you an accurate picture of the reality around you? All they're doing is making you have more babies. There's no other reason for your eyes, or your ears, or your sense of touch, or all of these things that we use as science. We call this empirical data. That information that we take in through our senses is the foundation of science, and there is no way of scientifically proving, let's say, by the way, scientific proof is not something that really is a reality, but scientifically demonstrating that what we take in through our senses is a reflection of reality at all. We get that from Christianity. It's a Christian belief that, and that's why, one of the reasons why modern science developed in a Christian culture. It's a specific kind of Christian culture, but it's a Christian culture that believes that God gave us our senses and we are to use them to learn of Him. So when the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God, or taste and see that the Lord is good, it means use your senses and use your mind to understand what is around you. On the other hand, think of Hindus. Hindus are at least supposed to believe that everything is an illusion. What you've taken through your senses is purely an illusion. It's not an accurate representation of reality. And there are many other things. Why would you believe that the laws of nature are going to be the same tomorrow as they are today, or that they were the same 1,000 years ago? There is a Christian reason for doing that, and that is that God created and sustains all things. That's clearly taught in Scripture. And that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So therefore, that tells us there are laws out there in nature that can be discovered, and they're going to be useful because that information is going to be useful because they're not going to change as we go forward in time. And we can use them then to understand at least something about the past. So having something like Christian beliefs is absolutely necessary for doing science. What atheism does is it kind of kludges off Christianity. It without justification just sort of takes those things and says, yes, well, it's obviously true. But it isn't obviously true. It certainly isn't obviously true to everyone. and certainly not a billion Hindus. And of course, Buddhists would see things in a different way as well. So there's, you can't not be religious, if you want to put it that way, with these things. What you can do is you can recognize your biases. And if you're interested in this question, there are a number of videos that I would recommend taking a look at on our website. One of them is the one that I just put up here for Creation Sabbath, about Leonard Brand. So if you go to grisda.org, choose videos, and then choose, and or if you go to creationsabbath.net, you can also find it there. It's free to stream. But there, Leonard Brand, the book that you're interested in, there's this video that I just produced about him, and you'll see that he is also talking about these things in quite a profound way.
Thank you, Dr. Standish. Here's another question sent in. Dr. Standish, does dinosaurs exist? And is it a proof of evolution?
It's my belief, certainly, that dinosaurs existed in the past. There's abundant evidence for it. My colleague Raul Esperante is currently studying one of the largest and most spectacular dinosaur trackway sites that's ever been discovered. It's absolutely incredible. And Dr. Arthur Chadwick, who I also recently released a film about, but there's lots of information about him on the internet, studies one of the most spectacular dinosaur bone beds. So Adventist scientists have been studying these things extensively for many years. Yes, they existed. There are a lot of misconceptions that people have about dinosaurs. You think of them as being, nothing but these monstrous, vicious, meat-eating creatures. In reality, dinosaurs were certainly not the largest animals that have ever existed. Those exist today, at least that we know of, and that would be blue whales. So whales are significantly bigger, but they live in the ocean. So dinosaurs, the very largest dinosaurs, they are the largest land animals that we know of. To be that big requires incredible design. I don't know whether you've ever studied or thought about things like giraffes, and all of the design that had to go into allowing giraffes to be that tall. It's not a trivial thing at all. But actually, most dinosaurs were normally sized creatures, maybe the size of a chicken to the size of a cow, that sort of size. So they and many of them were vegetarian, grazing kind of creatures. So I think that if we saw them, most dinosaurs, look, if I saw T-Rex coming my way, I'd be running too. But that is not the way most dinosaurs were. That's very clear. They seem to have been well adapted to the environment that they lived in, peaceful creatures. And it's just a tragedy that they're extinct. The reasons that people generally seem to argue against them ever existing has to do with some kind of misconception, that they somehow prove evolution true, which doesn't make logical sense. Or I've also heard people argue that God would never have made creatures so ugly. But remember, we've never seen a dinosaur. I suspect that many of them are quite beautiful creatures. And then some people have a problem with them fitting on the ark. That's really not a major issue. So I don't see a reason as a Seventh-day Adventist Christian and a Bible believer not to believe that dinosaurs were real. Certainly, there's abundant evidence that these were real creatures and quite spectacular.
Perhaps another question to follow up on that line of thought, Doctor, is that
Mhm.
how reliable is carbon dating? What are your thoughts about it?
Hmm. It depends on who you talk to. And this is a little bit outside of my area of expertise, so I will try to talk about what I do know. Okay, I have not done carbon dating. I'm not involved in that sort of thing. My colleague Ben Clausen has worked in the carbon 14 lab at the University of California at Irvine, I believe it is. Certainly, when they had the lab in Riverside at the University of California, Riverside. In fact, that lab was run by a gentleman who was an Adventist of a sort. He didn't really share the biblical beliefs, unfortunately, but certainly he was a member of the Loma Linda University Church, and let his presence be known. Anyway, he was also editor of Adventist Today, if you're familiar with that publication. Anyway, so I will tell you that as a scientist, I am I tend towards empiricism. So if something works, then it works, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Here's the problem with all radiometric dating that I've observed. When it gives the answers that people expect, they claim that it is a very good and reliable method of dating things. When it gives the answers they don't expect, then they claim that it's not reliable for some reason. With carbon 14, it seems to me that it presents far more problems for people who believe in at least extremely long ages than it does for those of us who believe that the Earth was, well, at least life on Earth and everything was recently created, thousands of years, not millions of years ago. One of the reasons for that is that you find carbon 14 in coal. And it's easily within the measurable ranges. The problem is that carbon 14 actually decays relatively fast, which means that you should find no carbon 14 at all after about 100,000 years. One or two claims have claimed to have gotten a little bit higher than that. But this coal is supposed to be hundreds of millions of years old, or 100 million or 200 million years, in that kind of range. It cannot have carbon 14 in it, according to the sort of standard Darwinian kind of thinking. So under those, in that situation, all of a sudden, the people who claim that carbon dating is absolutely true and reliable start saying, no, it's not true, it's not reliable, and it's not telling us the obvious thing, which is that the coal was formed less than 100,000 years ago. So do you see what I'm saying? There is a guy here in Loma Linda who has done some very interesting experimental work with carbon 14. His name is Dr. Paul Geim. And Dr. Geim has a book that's available on the internet for free. You can take a look at it. I believe it's called Scientific Theology, in which he talks about some interesting ideas about how carbon 14 dating may be working that would explain the patterns that we see in the data.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Standish. Some Christians try to mend or try to join evolution and creation. So, what are your thoughts on theistic evolution? And kindly describe what is theistic evolution about.
Yeah. Theistic evolution is a very hard thing to pin down because at least in my experience, and I've had plenty with it, as you try to pin down people on it, it's a little bit like trying to pin down a vapor. Somehow or other, it shifts elsewhere, and so I found it quite difficult to have really rational discussions with people who are believers in it. But I'll make a couple of observations about it. First of all, this seems to be something that is um, a kind of failed compromise. Um, to me, it presents the worst of all possible options because it's both unbiblical and unscientific as well. Um, what's commonly postulated is that the core idea is that evolution was God's method of creating. That would be a sort of, I think, a reasonably fair summarization of it. And so what that says then is that God uses struggle, suffering, and death to achieve his purposes. Death is not the enemy. Death is God's plan. And it brings in death before sin entered the world. So theologically, it's fatal, in my opinion, to biblical Christianity. And I don't see the attraction of it other than with a certain class of people, they labor under a kind of delusion that somehow or other embracing this idea will give them respectability in the secular world. It doesn't. Richard Dawkins, for example, mocks them. So I personally feel sorrow for people who've embraced that view. At the same time, I don't want to be too harsh about it. I hope and pray that people who've embraced this, I'd call it a strong delusion, will still be saved through God's grace. But my experience has been that you have teachers, for example, who will embrace this idea and kind of teach it one way or another in their classes. But my friends who embraced it, they're no longer Christians. They've got their whole lives ahead of them. Why would they embrace something that's obviously ridiculous and not evidence-based, particularly those with a scientific mindset? The bottom line is there will always be tension between scripture and the claims of science. That's inevitable because scripture is unchanging and it's true. It reveals the truth to us. Whereas science is an ongoing, ever-changing process of seeking to understand the world in which we live. So if science perfectly agrees with the Bible today, it won't tomorrow. And if you want to make both methods of finding out about reality, if you want to make them both worthless, then try to mash them together into something like theistic evolution. That's at least my view of it. I find it very unsatisfying on multiple levels. Probably the biggest arguments that I hear for it are actually emotional. I hear people saying this is the only way of keeping our young people in the church. We can't ask them to believe something as ridiculous as God created us all, thousands of years ago. How could we ask? It's asking too much of them and they'll all leave the church. No, that's, again, I tend towards empiricism myself. I've observed what it does. It doesn't save young people. It gently ushers them out of the church and out of their Christian faith.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Standish. Perhaps another question is that is there any scientific evidence or to believe about a recent 6-day literal creation? Or
Yeah,
yeah,
let me split my answer into two parts. The first part I would say is no. Okay, and the reason that I say that is the creation is a miracle, and what science studies is regularities, laws that are unchanging. Um, so when you have miracles occurring, the mechanism behind those is not accessible to science. So that's why I would say no, we're talking about something that's just a different category. It's science is not the method for understanding miracles. Science, however, may tell us that a miracle occurred. And so if we look at it from that angle, we could say, yes, there's actually abundant evidence of that we were created. Um, when you look at the way organisms work, they are not the kind of thing that you can build in an incremental way, which is what evolution requires, particularly at the biochemical and molecular level. These systems are simply not buildable step by step. They must all be there, all in place, all working at once for an organism to be alive. So um, there is clearly evidence of creation itself. A lot of people get very worried about the the date of the creation event, and there is abundant evidence that um, uh, those organisms, for example, that we find in the fossil record, which I should stress look just as designed as the organisms living today. Many of them look exactly the same as the organisms living today. So we don't necessarily see a whole lot of evolution going on there. We do see organisms showing up and we see them disappearing, but they don't look less designed. Let's put it that way. But we also find evidence associated with them that points very, very strongly towards a recent origin. So a beautiful example is found in dinosaurs themselves. It turns out that dinosaurs now we have many papers looking at the presence of proteins that are still there in dinosaur bones and things like that. Um, Unbelievable preservation. In fact, there was a paper that came out here in the last month or so claiming that you can actually see chromatin, DNA basically, inside cells preserved inside dinosaur cartilage that was fossilized, which is astonishing, absolutely astonishing. Um, that one's going to be debated quite a bit, so don't take it to the bank yet. However, it's well established at this point that certainly proteins have been preserved in these dinosaur bones. We, you know, this stuff is not going to last for millions of years. In fact, it's been extensively studied how long it lasts for forensic reasons, among other things. If you find a skeleton, somebody who might have been murdered or something, and you want to understand what's happened there so that you can figure out how that skeleton wound up in the jungle or something. Well, one of the things that they've looked at is the rates at which these different kinds of proteins and stuff in bones decays. And, there's just no reasonable expectation that this stuff would last for millions of years, and yet it's there. It's astonishing to me that it would last for thousands of years. So that would be, in my opinion, very strong evidence that these were created. The fossils were created recently. And the last time I checked, we've been actually keeping a list of papers, and we have over 400 peer-reviewed papers talking about not just proteins, but even nucleic acids of various kinds, and possibly most astonishing to me, unsaturated fats associated with these things. If you know anything about organic chemistry, the idea that they're going to last for thousands of years is extraordinary. Let alone millions. Let alone hundreds of millions or 100 million with dinosaurs.
And perhaps another resource that I should say about that Dr. Standish is that Dr. Leonard Brand and Dr. Chadwick have co-authored a book entitled
Mm.
Science, Faith, and I think it's Earth's History or The Age of the
Yeah.
Earth, published by Andrews University Press. So I think that's a good resource
Yes,
pertaining
it's
to
faith, reason, and Earth history, and I
yeah
should tell you, it is available for free. You can get it from, I believe, you can download a free version from Amazon.com,
yeah
and you can also download a free version from Apple. If you go to the grisda.org website, you'll find it can be downloaded there. There are links to where it can be downloaded. So it's an excellent book. And if there's anybody there who speaks Spanish better than they speak English, we just released a Spanish version. Or else if it hasn't been released, it's coming out very soon. And it's
okay. So
free.
before we okay yeah, it's free via Kindle app and it's free via Apple iBooks. So get it for free, and so you can study the age of the Earth, how it relates with science and how it relates with faith. So before we um, hear a song and we proceed with our Kahoot quiz, Dr. Standish, do you have any encouragement or words of advice for students who would like to pursue a career of science?
Well, first of all, if you're interested in science, I would highly encourage you to pursue that interest. The world is an amazing place. God created endless wonder for us in it. Obviously, there's that concern that as you go through your academic program, you may start buying into this kind of materialistic Darwinism. And so, be careful. Keep your faith strong, stay connected with other Christians. Understand that you are not going to have an answer to every possible question in the world. Nobody does. The questions that are unanswered by Darwinism are, in my opinion, far more profound than the questions that are unanswered by ourselves. Sometimes, in my experience, it's a matter of waiting. People are working away on various things, and God will provide answers, but not 100% of the time. There'll always be something new to find out. There'll always be questions that we have for God. And maybe when Jesus comes, he'll tell us, hey, you've got eternity, so you can work on figuring out those puzzles as well. But never lose sight of the big picture, which is you are fearfully and wonderfully made. The world that God made for us to inhabit is absolutely incredible. When it was made, it was very good. Yes, it's damaged, but if you think about it this way, I think it helps. When you look at a fantastic work of art like the Venus de Milo, asking questions about the Venus de Milo's arms is pointless because we don't have any information. We can sort of extrapolate and make suggestions and all sorts of things about them. But what we can do is we can look at the actual evidence that we have in front of us, the Venus de Milo, and recognize that that is a beautiful work of art. It was made by an artist who was a genius. Same sort of thing with the creation. So that's where I would put it. One last thing: make sure you know what the Bible actually says before you get into arguments with people. If you haven't read through the Bible from beginning to end, that's an exercise that I really encourage you to do. It's only a matter of reading about 3 chapters a day for a year, and you'll be done before the end of the year. I've done that on a fairly regular basis over the years. It's extraordinarily useful for me because, in fact, it's helped me immensely when I've had theologians who are trying to destroy my faith. And it became evident that they were unaware of what the Bible actually says as well. So read the Bible, make sure you know what's there before you listen to too many arguments about what it does or doesn't say and those sorts of things.